Bioethics. Bioethics is an important topic because we have seen an explosion in biotechnology. Uh, do you realize, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but do you realize that in every room there's somebody who's only alive because of medical technology developed in the last 75 years? It's pretty incredible to think about. Jeremy Rifkin calls our time the biotech century. Brent Waters said technology is the way we live and move and have our being in today's age, and that's especially true in medical questions. So, one of the articles that I suggested you read was by Michael Sleesman, and it was called Bioethics Past, Present, and Future. Michael Sleesman was my teacher for bioethics, and so I'm going to outline a little bit about what he says in that article in the next few slides. But if you're interested in this area, may I suggest three places you might find interesting to get started? The Birth of Bioethics by Albert Janssen is it kind of traces sort of the original impetus and the rise. If you want to have chapter by chapter of major players in bioethics, that's the middle book, The Story of Bioethics. And then if you're saying, I'm not interested in the background, I just want to kind of know how do bioethicists deal with questions? Well, Scott Ray and Paul Cox, two Christian bioethicists, wrote the textbook, Bioethics, A Christian Approach in a Pluralistic Age. It's a bit dated now, but the second edition, the renewed edition, is coming out this year. So I want you to know about this work. So, according to Sleesman, classic bioethics starts in the 4th century BC with the Hippocratic tradition. Maybe you've heard of the Hippocratic Oath, which has that famous line, do no harm. Most people, when they hear that, they think that's cute. It's a nice line. I'm sure they also applied it to all sorts of false gods and who knows, witchcraft or wizardry. So it's probably just an interesting phrase. But it turns out that there was quite a bit of interesting history behind the Hippocratic tradition, and that it was fused with a Christian worldview all the way up until the Enlightenment, in which you see two very important points being made that healthcare is about professionalism and promoting the patient's welfare. To say it another way, it's about how to make things better for the person. And I know that sounds simple or silly, but you're going to find out later there's a real debate now about what a doctor's role is. And if you're thinking, how could anybody disagree with trying to make things better for a person? Well, we'll find that out. Um, you can trace the rise in throughout uh, from the Enlightenment on through the rise of the scientific uh, methods and technology, but all the way up to World War II, you have another sort of major moment of change in bioethics because if you remember, the big thing going on in World War II was the idea of exterminating whole people, and so eugenics. I hate to just drop this bomb and then run away, but just so you know, if you're thinking a big bad Hitler, where did he get his ideas from? You don't have to look too far. Something like eugenics was being taught in all of the Ivy League campuses in America. So I just want you to know what was going on at this time period. It just hadn't quite hit the popular masses yet. And so coming out of World War II was this idea of we need to rethink how to make sure that we don't do that again. And so you have, for example, the Nuremberg Code, which is a code about how to do medical ethics. And there's a rise in all kinds of things like patients' autonomy and rights, informed consent in medical practices, the importance of getting consent from human subjects, and even with their consent, there's some things you just can't do to them in research ethics. Um, Up until the modern day, many of you may remember when President George W. Bush was trying to figure out what to do with, for example, stem cell research. He developed the President's Council on Bioethics. And so this is a major thing. The Lausanne Conference came up with the 31 most important issues facing evangelism in the modern world, and one of them was bioethics. So this is an important area. When you hear the phrase bioethics and you say, what do these people study? You're probably thinking about beginning of life and end of life. Now, I don't particularly like the three phrases I'm going to use, but it's so catchy and easy to remember. I'm going to use them. They're from Nigel Cameron, and they are the first two are making life and taking life. So you think about, for example, issues like abortion. Roe v. Wade brought it to the public attention in a brand new way. But then all kinds of other questions. Contraception. In America, in jurisprudence, the Griswold case would be one that was connected to this. For example, um, if there's some, can the state sort of force businesses to provide coverage for contraception? But what if you have a person who thinks that that's wrong and they run the business and that sort of question? Questions about IVF, which is in vitro fertilization. Questions about surrogacy. And there's a host of others and subcategories of these, but the questions at the beginning of life. And then you also think about questions at the end of life, whether it be PAS means physician assisted suicide, um, often also called euthanasia, or someone would say it's not euthanasia, it's physician assisted suicide. And so these phrases are used depending on nuance, what we're talking about. And then the question about palliative care. Is there a difference between killing and letting die? And we talk a little bit about that. So, making life, taking life, beginning of life, the end of life. That is the major areas of concern when bioethics first kind of hit the scene as a major question. Sleesman says we're now in a period he would call bioethics 2.0. Now, if you're looking for another catchy phrase, making life, taking life, the next one he's going to use is faking life, which we'll come back to that later, but it's an easy way to remember it. But here are the main questions for Bioethics 1. When does human life begin? When does human life end? Does quality of life matter? Are all human beings entitled to special value and dignity? And what does this entail? These are questions that have historically been tied to the study of bioethics. But now we're in a new era. I'm not at all saying these questions aren't important or aren't worth considering or talking about, and we're going to talk about these today. But what are bioethicists doing now if they've already plowed that ground? Well, we're now able to engineer. Since we mapped the human genome in 2003, we have enormous source of knowledge about human genetics, which has provide new opportunities. We can do research on adult stem cells and on embryonic stem cells. Questions about cloning. What about animal-human hybrids? What about transhumanism? Just one of 1,000 interesting topics that come up. What happens when we're able to create an artificial womb? I want you to think about that for a second. Think about the major debates about abortion and how often the number one issue comes up. What about a woman's right to her own body? What if there's an artificial womb that is not connected to a woman's body? What would be the argument then? So, our ability to do new things brings with it a whole new set of questions. And the shift now is from the person to the society, not just an individual act. What do we talk about abortion or taking someone's life at the end of their life? But rather, what is the impact, whether it be the laws that we make or the technology we create, and its effect on the entire world? And not just that, what does it even mean to be human anymore? So this is why continues to be on the forefront, on the cutting edge. In our center, we just hired Daniel Crouch, whose expertise is in bioethics and AI technology. So you see, it's more than just What are the ethical questions about beginning and end of life? But also, what are we able to do, and how do we get ahead of asking some of those important questions, before Terminator 2 takes us all over? So that's the idea there.